I appreciate the gentleman's question and the ask of the witnesses. The gentlelady, sticking with North Carolina, the gentlelady from North Carolina is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank our witnesses for being here today. And I've invited some students in from Appalachian State University to hear the comments today. Dr. George, in your testimony, you call our attention to the threat posed to the integrity of our colleges and universities by those who refuse to entertain or listen to arguments that challenge their opinions. But you also share the good news that the situation at Princeton is not all bad. Could you elaborate on why that is? What particular policies are in place or actions has Princeton taken that encourage intellectual diversity on campus, and could other institutions of higher education replicate this approach?
Well, thank you very much, Congresswoman. Let me just mention 4 things very quickly. First, we have a university administration at Princeton led by Christopher Eisgruber, who is himself a First Amendment scholar, that is very sensitive to issues of free speech, supportive of issues of free speech, and also concerned about the problem of a lack of viewpoint diversity. Our administration wants there to be on the faculty as well as in the student body a range of perspectives represented so people will hear ideas from people who actually espouse those ideas. Secondly, we were the second university in the country after the University of Chicago to adopt the University of Chicago's excellent free speech principles. These were the report of the Jeffrey Stone Committee, which Mr. Raskin, I'm sure, will be familiar with. Third, the university was completely behind Cornel West and myself, and enthusiastically when we proposed to teach together. They celebrated and promoted the idea of 2 outspoken people representing competing points of view getting into the classroom and teaching together. And I know Cornell and I both really appreciated the support the university gave. And then fourth, in the year 2000, we founded the James Madison Program in American Ideals and Institutions, of which I have the honor to be the director, and it's part of the mission of the program to ensure that there is a wide variety of viewpoints represented. A fundamental problem we haven't talked about today is the lack of voices on campus, especially in the faculty ranks or visiting speakers, who represent views that are contrary to campus orthodoxies. Liberty University should be doing this. Notre Dame and Georgetown should be doing it too, but all universities should be doing it. Princeton needs to do more of it. Certainly Yale needs to do it. We talk about there were 5,000, I think that was the right figure, roughly 5,000 commencement speakers. How many of them were conservatives? How many conservatives were given honorary degrees, which is a way that, that universities hold up achievement to be modeled for their students? It's one thing to not disinvite people, that's great. But if people representing competing views against the dominant views are not being invited in the first place, I'm not going to celebrate too heavily that we're not disinviting people.
Thank you, Dr. George. Mr. Langhofer, in your testimony, you describe how public universities across the country inappropriately limit student speech on campus, and my colleague from North Carolina showed that chart about constricting speech zones that limit free speech activities to a small area of campus. As you pointed out, there have been numerous incidents where students have been wrongfully prevented from sharing their viewpoints. Can you expand on why this type of policy is detrimental to the free exchange of ideas on campus? Can you give us some examples of universities that have remedied their unconstitutional speech zones and how they did so?
Sure. I think, all of the speakers today have demonstrated why this is so harmful to tell students that they only have to speak in one area. First of all, it tells them that their public areas, the areas where, where they live, their views, they cannot speak without the government giving them permission. That's the wrong message that we should be sending to our students. Our students should know that we live in a free society and that they're free to share their views and that others are free to refute those views if they disagree with it. So that's a bad message. But it's also a wrong message because the government almost always uses that with discretion to say your view shouldn't be allowed. And so at Kennesaw State, where we also have another lawsuit against Kennesaw State regarding speech zones because they allowed certain people to speak outside the speech zone, and they put other people inside the speech zone. That's what happens when you give unbridled discretion to university administrators. So I think it's a problem because students are being taught that if they want to exercise their rights, they have to get permission first. And that's the wrong message that we should be sending to our students.
I thank the gentlelady. The gentleman from Michigan is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. George, if you'll start with me, please. And you quoted Justice Scalia about hate speech, and I remember the section. But he also talks about the fact that hate speech is not unconstitutional. Oh, that's that, in fact, it is protected.
Yeah, yes, that is right. Sorry. Yes, that is right. One of the things I find as I go around the country as a con law person, I share that with Mr. Rankin, is that many students, very well-educated students, high-achieving students, believe that there is an exception to the First Amendment guarantee of free speech for hate speech, and of course that's not true.
Well, and I'm not an advocate of hate speech, don't get me wrong, but the reality is that, and Dr. Harper, join us here, because what ultimately addressed some of the hate speech you referenced, I'll leave out the word, but what ultimately addressed the fact that some terminology wasn't acceptable? It was society, was it not? It wasn't a bureaucrat. It wasn't a college administrator. What addressed that wrong?
Absolutely. It was society and conversation.
Okay.
Right? Which is why I'm a proponent of conversation about these things on campus.
Hang in here with me. So the reality is rather than have institutions or groups of students yell down someone they disagree with, even if they're saying things that are vile, should it not be society as a whole, not segments of society that say you don't get to speak here? Or in fact, cause significant disruption and potential violence that the cost of having the speaker supersedes, they stop speech? Is that not wrong?
I mean, if we waited for society, I'm afraid that we will not get the kind of justice and humanity that students deserve on a campus.
So it's not society. We've got some group of higher people that are determining what's right for everyone. Is that what you're suggesting?
I'm suggesting that it is the responsibility of college presidents and university faculty members to create the conditions that allow students to understand why what is being said is problematic and to complicate those ideas.
Let me share with you a story about college professors and administrators. Your patience, Mr. Chair. 1976, I was a student at Michigan State University. College professor that disagreed with me, I disagree with her position on pro-life versus pro-choice. Catholic. All of a sudden, my essay grades were considerably poorer, significantly poorer. In fact, I tutored for the college because my grades are so good. I appealed the grade. She was wrong by over 2.5 grades. They changed my grade, and my tests subsequent to that were subject to review for the college after that. She left that position. She became the dean of the Honors College. You know what happened to me? I was called for review of whether or not I was entitled to honor status. And they withdrew my honor status. Why? Because I wouldn't take anthropology of speech. Now, that was 1978. So when you say college administrators should make a determination, they are just as biased as society is. What, because they have more education, somehow they are theoretically better people?
Mr. Mitchell, what you described in 1978 is a version of what I hear in 2018. The difference is I hear it most often from students of color who suggest that there is not sufficient ideological diversity in the courses that they take. The overwhelming majority of the authors that are assigned to them come from particular points of view.
I get so much time. The reality is we're not talking about diversity. We're talking about punitive action. We're talking about, Dr. Stanger, let me go to you real quickly. Because you said, well, if scholars are inviting guests, then they should have protection. Mm-hmm. And if they're not scholars, they shouldn't?
Just a correction. I said members of the faculty or a recognized student group, which covers just about everybody on campus.
I'm sorry, I took it as scholars, but maybe I misunderstood what you were saying.
I like to think we have a little more weight than the students, but that's okay if we...
Dr. George, real quickly, in a few seconds I have left here. You made a reference in talking about protests and people protesting someone else's speech. You said something important there. You said respectful disagreement. Is heckling down a speaker, is threatening violence, does that meet your definition of respectful?
No, that's not. It's disrespectful. And it's an unwillingness to engage, and that means it's an unwillingness to learn.
Mm-hmm. One more quick question for you, Dr. Harper. You made a comment that somehow you minimized 19 disinvitations of speakers last academic year. Is it acceptable to you to have 19 decisions on academic campuses that they won't house a minority student with a non-minority student? Would that be acceptable to you? Is that would be acceptable standard?
As I suggested in my written and oral testimony, university administrators reserve the right to withdraw invitations to any speaker, including me.
That's not answering my question. If a university administrator decides that they won't house a student of color, they decide they're not going to house them with Caucasian students. University administrator makes a decision. Is that acceptable 19 times at a university?
Is that a question pertaining to freedom of speech on college campuses?
It's a decision by university campus. It's a violation of constitutional rights, right?
I don't see how that is relevant to this particular conversation.
I'm sure you don't, but it is relevant. 19 decisions to violate someone's constitutional rights for free speech.
It is not a constitutional violation when you are a guest who has entered into a contractual agreement with an institution that makes clear in the contract that they reserve the right to rescind or withdraw the invitation.
One more comment, Mr. Chair. The university is not the final arbiter because it's the taxpayers. It's the people that are paying to have that university there. And in contrast to the comments you made earlier about it being their university, is the public's university, or is the private university that is the endowment of people paying for it? With all due respect, they aren't the final decision maker of that.
I did not suggest in my testimony that they get the final decision, but they absolutely get a say, and they get to say that they don't want this person on their campus. They do get to protest. They, too, have freedom of speech.
Well, there's a line in the protest. I think we can agree that that's been crossed more than once. Thank you. I'll yield back.